The river snaked its way through the verdant landscape, a shimmering ribbon reflecting the azure sky. On its banks sat my little slice of paradise, a charming, newly renovated riverfront home, complete with a sturdy dock and breathtaking views. After years of tireless work and strategic saving, I had finally secured my dream. The mornings were spent sipping coffee on the porch, watching the mist dissipate over the water, and the evenings were filled with the gentle sounds of nature and the camaraderie of the local wildlife. Peace reigned supreme. Or so I thought. The quiet solitude of my riverside existence was about to be shattered by a force more disruptive than any thunderstorm. Karen. Not just any Karen, mind you, but the self-appointed guardian of suburban conformity, the self-anointed HOA overlord, the bane of free-spirited homeowners everywhere. I knew the HOA existed. Of course. I'd reviewed the bylaws before purchasing the property. They were relatively benign, mostly concerned with maintaining landscaping standards and noise levels. I figured I could handle that. What I hadn't anticipated was the sheer, unadulterated zeal with which Karen enforced these rules, or rather, the rules she believed existed. My first encounter with Karen was memorable. I was tending to my small vegetable garden near the water's edge, enjoying the feel of the rich soil between my fingers, when I heard the distinct clack of sensible shoes approaching on the gravel path. I looked up to see a woman, perfectly coiffed and impeccably dressed in a pastel pantsuit, marching towards me with a clipboard clutched firmly in her hand. Her expression was stern. Her lips pursed in a way that suggested I had already committed some egregious violation of the homeowner's code. "Excuse me," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut through the gentle murmur of the river. "Are you the owner of this property?" I straightened up, wiped my hands on my gardening gloves, and gave her a polite smile. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "I am Karen," she announced, as if that name alone should inspire awe and obedience. "I'm with the Homeowners Association, and I'm here to inform you that you are in violation of several regulations." My eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, and what violations might those be?" Karen consulted her clipboard with a dramatic flourish. "Firstly," she said, her gaze sweeping over my humble garden, "the unapproved vegetable patch. All landscaping plans must be submitted to and approved by the HOA board prior to implementation." "I wasn't aware that growing tomatoes required bureaucratic approval," I replied, trying to keep the amusement out of my voice. "But I'm happy to submit a plan if necessary." "It is necessary," Karen stated firmly. "Secondly, the color of your exterior lights is not in compliance with the approved palette." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the warm, inviting glow emanating from my porch lights. "They are far too amber. Regulation stipulates a soft, white light." I bit back a sigh. The amber lights were specifically chosen to minimize light pollution and attract fewer insects, but I decided not to argue. "All right, I can change the bulbs," I conceded. But Karen was just getting started. "And thirdly," she continued, her voice taking on a particularly officious tone, "this entire section of riverfront property is designated as common area and is therefore subject to HOA control. You are not permitted to cultivate or maintain this land without express permission." That stopped me cold. "Excuse me," I said, my smile fading. "This is my property. It's clearly marked on the deed." "Clearly marked," I repeated, trying to maintain a semblance of calm despite the rising tide of incredulity. "I have the deed right here, in the house. I'd be happy to show it to you." Karen scoffed, a sound like air hissing from a punctured tire. "Deeds can be inaccurate," she said, her eyes narrowed. "The HOA has historical precedents in this area. This riverfront strip has always been considered common property, used for recreational purposes by all residents." Recreational purposes? I'd seen exactly 0 residents picnicking on my meticulously maintained lawn. The only footprints I'd found were those of the occasional deer and the persistent, scavenging raccoons. "I understand your position," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I assure you, my deed is perfectly valid. It was thoroughly vetted by a title company before the sale was finalized." "Title companies make mistakes," Karen retorted, her voice rising in pitch. "And frankly, I doubt you even have a deed. You probably just moved in here thinking you could do whatever you wanted, flouting the rules and regulations that the rest of us abide by." The accusation stung. I prided myself on being a responsible and considerate neighbor. I always made sure to keep my property tidy. I never played loud music, and I even went out of my way to wave to the other residents as they drove by. To be accused of deliberately flouting the rules was infuriating. "That's simply not true," I said, my voice hardening. I researched the HOA bylaws before I bought this place. I'm perfectly willing to comply with reasonable regulations, but I'm not going to be bullied into giving up my property rights. Karen's face flushed a shade of crimson that rivaled my prize-winning tomatoes. Bullying? I'm not bullying anyone. I'm simply enforcing the rules. Enforcing them based on what? I challenged. Vague historical claims. I have a legal document that proves ownership. What do you have? Karen's eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape route. I have the authority of the Homeowners Association, she declared, puffing out her chest. We represent the interests of the entire community. Except for me, apparently, I said, raising an eyebrow. You're new here, Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. You don't understand how things work, that we have a certain standard to maintain. A standard that apparently involves claiming private property as public land. I countered. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, I just want to enjoy my home in peace. That if you have any actual evidence to support your claim, I'm happy to review it. But until then, I suggest you respect my property rights and leave me alone. Karen glared at me, her eyes burning with indignation. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll be back, and I'll have proof, you'll see. With that, she turned on her sensible shoes and marched back towards the street, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hand. That I watched her go, a knot of apprehension forming in my stomach. That I knew this wasn't the end of it. Karen was the kind of person who wouldn't give up easily. She was determined to prove me wrong, even if it meant bending the truth, twisting the rules, or outright fabricating evidence. That I sighed and returned to my gardening. But the peace and tranquility I had enjoyed just moments before had vanished. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I knew I would have to be prepared to defend my property against Karen's relentless assault. The battle for my riverfront paradise had just begun, and I had a feeling it was going to get ugly. The following days were filled with a low-grade anxiety. Every time a car slowed down near my property, I found myself peering out the window, half expecting to see Karen and a posse of HOA enforcers descending upon me. That I started researching local property laws, brushing up on my knowledge of riparian rights and HOA limitations. That I wanted to be prepared for whatever legal shenanigans Karen might try to pull. My research only confirmed what I already knew. My deed was solid. The property lines were clearly defined, and there was no mention of any HOA easement or common area designation affecting the riverfront portion of my land. That I even contacted the title company that had handled the sale just to double-check. They assured me that everything was in order and that I had nothing to worry about. But Karen wasn't one to be deterred by facts or legal precedent. That a week after our initial encounter, she returned, this time accompanied by 2 other women, both dressed in similar pastel outfits and armed with equally menacing clipboards. They looked like a synchronized swimming team of suburban disapproval. We're here to conduct a formal inspection, Karen announced, her voice ringing with self-importance. The HOA has received numerous complaints about your property. Complaints? I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. From whom? The local squirrels. The complaints are confidential, Karen replied, her lips pursed. But they are serious. We need to access your property to assess the alleged violations. I'm sorry, I said, blocking their path. But I'm not comfortable with you wandering around my property without a warrant. That I have no idea what you might be looking for, or what you might try to plant. Karen's face flushed. We don't need a warrant. We're the Homeowners Association. We have the right to inspect any property within the community. That's not true, I countered, holding my ground. You have the right to enforce the HOA bylaws, but you don't have the right to trespass on my property. And unless you have a court order, I'm not letting you in. One of the other women, a thin, bespectacled woman with a severe bun, spoke up for the first time. We just want to take a look at the riverfront area, she said, her voice surprisingly meek. We've received reports that you're building an unauthorized structure. An unauthorized structure? I repeated, incredulous. I haven't built anything. I have a small garden shed, but it's been there for years, long before I moved in. We need to see it for ourselves, Karen insisted, her voice rising. We suspect it may be encroaching on the common area. There is no common area, I exclaimed, my patience wearing thin. I've shown you my deed. It clearly states that this is my property. The deed is wrong, Karen shouted, her voice cracking with frustration. We have historical evidence that proves this land belongs to the HOA. Then show it to me, I challenged. Show me this historical evidence. Show me something, anything, that supports your claim. Because all I see is a bunch of busybodies trying to harass me and bully me into giving up my property rights. The three women exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of anger and embarrassment. They clearly hadn't expected me to stand up to them so forcefully. "We'll be back," Karen said, her voice trembling with rage. "We'll get a court order, and when we do, you'll be sorry." With that, they turned and marched back to their cars, their clipboards clutched tightly in their hands that I watched them go, feeling a mixture of relief and trepidation that I had managed to fend them off for now. But I knew this was far from over. Karen was determined to win this battle, and she wasn't going to give up without a fight. And I, it seemed, was equally determined to defend my riverfront paradise, no matter the cost. The stakes, however, were about to get much, much higher. The threat of a court order hung heavy in the air that I knew Karen wasn't bluffing. She was the type to follow through, even if it meant spending the HOA's funds on a frivolous lawsuit. That I decided to take a proactive approach. The next morning, I drove down to the county courthouse and filed a formal request for a declaratory judgment, seeking a legal affirmation of my property rights. That I figured it was better to be on the offensive than to wait for Karen to launch her attack. The legal process was slow and tedious, involving mountains of paperwork and endless consultations with my lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Sarah. Sarah was confident that we would win, but she cautioned me that the case could drag on for months, even years, and that the legal fees could be substantial. I was prepared for the long haul, that I wasn't going to let Karen and her HOA bullies steal my riverfront paradise. That in the meantime, Karen continued her campaign of harassment. She sent me a stream of increasingly absurd HOA violation notices, ranging from the length of my grass, which was perfectly manicured, thank you very much, to the color of my mailbox, which, according to Karen, was not sufficiently neutral. She even complained about the bird feeders I had hung in my trees, claiming they were attracting unwanted wildlife and creating a public nuisance. I ignored the notices, knowing they were nothing more than petty attempts to annoy me. But Karen wasn't content with passive-aggressive tactics. She started spreading rumors about me around the neighborhood, telling people that I was a troublemaker, a lawbreaker, and a threat to the community. She even suggested that I was running some kind of illegal business out of my home. The rumors were hurtful and frustrating. That I had always tried to be a good neighbor, and it stung to be portrayed as some kind of villain. But I refused to let Karen's lies get to me. That I knew that the truth would eventually come out, and that the people who mattered would see through her charade. One afternoon, as I was working in my garden, I noticed a group of people standing on the edge of my property, staring at my riverfront. They were all members of the HOA, and Karen was leading the charge. "We're here to conduct a public demonstration," Karen announced, her voice amplified by a bullhorn. "We want to show the community how this property is being misused and abused." I sighed and straightened up, wiping the sweat from my brow. "What exactly do you think I'm misusing and abusing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're blocking access to the riverfront," Karen shouted through the bullhorn. "You're preventing the community from enjoying this beautiful natural resource." "That's ridiculous," I replied. "I'm not blocking access to anything. The river is still there. People can still swim, boat, and fish, just like they always have. But they can't do it from your property," Karen retorted, "because you're selfishly hoarding it all for yourself." The crowd started to murmur in agreement. I could feel their eyes on me, judging me, condemning me. "This is my property," I exclaimed, my voice rising in anger. "I paid for it. I own it, and I have the right to use it as I see fit. Not when it deprives the community of its rightful access." Karen shouted back, "This land belongs to all of us." The situation was spiraling out of control. I could feel my anger building, threatening to explode. I knew I had to do something to defuse the situation before it turned violent. But what? I needed something dramatic, something unexpected. Something that would make Karen and her HOA cronies back down once and for all. And then, I remembered my secret weapon, the one Karen didn't know about, the one that was about to change everything. Before I unleashed my secret weapon, I decided to try one last, desperate attempt at reason. I needed to show these people, once and for all, that I wasn't some selfish interloper trying to steal their precious riverfront. I needed to prove that I was the rightful owner, and that Karen's claims were based on nothing but hot air and HOA fuel delusion. All right, everyone calm down, I shouted, raising my hands to quiet the murmuring crowd. I understand your concerns. You think I'm blocking access to the riverfront, that I'm depriving you of something that rightfully belongs to you. But that's simply not true. This is my property, and I have the deed to prove it. I turned and strode towards my house, ignoring Karen's shouts of protest. I entered the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I went straight to my study, opened the safe, and retrieved the original property deed. It was a thick, official-looking document, filled with legal jargon and embossed seals. It was the key to my riverfront paradise, and I was about to use it to silence Karen once and for all. I returned to the crowd, holding the deed aloft like a sacred scroll. Here it is, I announced, my voice ringing with confidence. The official property deed. It clearly outlines the boundaries of my property, including the entire riverfront area. There is no mention of any HOA easement or common area designation. This land is mine, plain and simple. I approached Karen, who was standing at the front of the crowd, her face a mask of fury. Here, Karen, I said, extending the deed towards her. Take a look for yourself. Read it. Understand it. See that you're wrong. Karen hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between the deed and my face. Then, with a defiant snort, she snatched the document from my hand. She scanned the pages, her brow furrowed in concentration. The crowd watched in silence, waiting for her verdict. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Karen pored over the deed, her expression changing from defiance to confusion to dawning realization. I could see the color draining from her face as she grasped the truth. I was right. The deed was clear. The property lines were unambiguous. The riverfront land belonged to me. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and defeat. This can't be right, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Karen, I said, my voice calm but firm. The deed is clear. This is my property. You were wrong. Karen's supporters in the crowd began to murmur amongst themselves, their faces reflecting their own growing realization. They had been misled. They had been manipulated. They had been used as pawns in Karen's personal vendetta. But the HOA has always maintained that this land is common property, Karen protested weakly. We have historical records that prove it. Then show them to me, I challenged. Show me these historical records. Show me something, anything, that contradicts the deed. Because all I see is a legal document that proves I am the rightful owner. Karen fell silent, her gaze fixed on the ground. She knew she was defeated. She had been exposed as a liar and a bully. Her credibility was shattered. The crowd began to disperse, their enthusiasm for the demonstration completely evaporated. They had come to protest, but they had left with a newfound respect for my property rights and a healthy dose of skepticism towards Karen and her HOA. I retrieved my deed from Karen's trembling hands. Feeling a surge of triumph. I had won this battle. I had proven my point. I had defended my riverfront paradise. But I knew that the war wasn't over yet. Karen was still out there, and she was still determined to get her way. And that's when I knew it was time to show her, and everyone else, just what I was truly capable of. It was time to unleash my secret weapon. It was time to bring out the big guns. The dispersal of the crowd should have been the end of it. Karen had been defeated, her claims thoroughly debunked. Any reasonable person would have accepted defeat and retreated, licking their wounds and reassessing their strategy. But Karen wasn't reasonable. Karen was, well, Karen. Even with the deed staring her in the face, even with her supporters abandoning her in droves, even with the weight of undeniable evidence crushing her flimsy arguments, she refused to accept reality. Instead, she doubled down, clinging to her delusion with the tenacity of a barnacle on a ship's hull. This deed is fraudulent, she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. It's a forgery. I bet you printed it yourself on your fancy computer. I rolled my eyes. Karen, that's ridiculous. The deed is an official document, registered with the county. It's been thoroughly vetted by legal professionals. They were all in on it, she insisted, her eyes wide with paranoia. It's a conspiracy. They're all trying to steal our riverfront. I sighed. Arguing with Karen was like trying to nail jelly to a tree. It was pointless and exhausting. Even if the deed is real, she continued, her voice taking on a new, more sinister tone, the HOA has overriding rights. We have the authority to regulate the use of all property within the community, regardless of what the deed says. That's not true, I countered. The HOA can enforce reasonable rules and regulations, but it can't infringe on my fundamental property rights. You can't just arbitrarily claim my land as common property. That's illegal. We can do whatever we want. Karen shouted, her face contorted with rage. We're the Homeowners Association. We represent the interests of the community, and we're not going to let you get away with this. She turned to the few remaining HOA members who were still lingering on the edge of my property. We need to take action, she cried. We need to sue him. We need to get a court order. We need to do whatever it takes to protect our riverfront. The remaining HOA members, a motley crew of disgruntled retirees and suburban busybodies, nodded in agreement. They were clearly still under Karen's spell, despite the overwhelming evidence against her. We're with you, Karen, one of them shouted. We'll fight him all the way. I shook my head in disbelief. These people were completely delusional. They were willing to spend their hard-earned money on a frivolous lawsuit, all because they couldn't accept the fact that they were wrong. All right, Karen, I said, my voice hardening. If you want to sue me, go ahead. Waste your money. Waste your time, but I'm not backing down. I'm not giving up my property rights, and I'm not going to let you bully me or harass me any longer. I turned and walked back towards my house, leaving Karen and her remaining supporters sputtering with rage. I knew that this was far from over. Karen was determined to make my life miserable, and she wasn't going to give up until she had exhausted every possible avenue of attack. But I was ready for her. I had the law on my side. I had the deed to prove my ownership. And now, I had my secret weapon. It was time to unleash the beast. It was time to show Karen that she was messing with the wrong homeowner. It was time to introduce her to the USS Relentless. The motion for summary judgment and the letter to the HOA board were just the opening salvos in my legal battle against Karen. I wanted to make sure that I had all my bases covered, so I decided to take another step to solidify my position. I contacted the local authorities. I scheduled a meeting with the town's code enforcement officer, a no-nonsense woman named Officer Miller. I explained the situation to her, detailing Karen's harassment and the HOA's baseless claims of an implied easement. I presented her with copies of my deed, the survey, and the relevant zoning ordinances. Officer Miller listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly grim as I recounted the events. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. I've dealt with the HOA name before, she said. They can be a real pain in the neck. They often try to overstep their authority and bully homeowners into compliance. That's exactly what they're doing to me, I said. They're trying to claim my riverfront property as common area, even though it's clearly marked on my deed. Officer Miller nodded. I've reviewed your documents, and I agree with you. The deed is clear. The property belongs to you. The HOA has no right to interfere with your use of it. So, what can you do? I asked. I can send them a letter, she replied. I can remind them of the limitations on their authority, and I can warn them that they will be subject to fines and other penalties if they continue to harass you. That would be great, I said. I just want them to leave me alone. Officer Miller smiled. I can't guarantee that they'll stop, she said. But I can make it clear that they're playing with fire, and if they cross the line, I won't hesitate to take action. A few days later, I received a copy of the letter that Officer Miller had sent to the HOA board. It was a strongly worded document, citing specific violations of the town's code and warning the HOA of the potential consequences of their actions. The town name will not tolerate harassment or intimidation of its residents, Officer Miller wrote. The HOA name is hereby ordered to cease and desist from any further interference with Mr./Ms. narrator's name, use of her property. Failure to comply with this order will result in the imposition of fines and other penalties, as authorized by law. I felt a surge of relief when I read the letter. It was good to know that the local authorities were on my side, and that they were willing to stand up to Karen and her HOA bullies. With the motion for summary judgment, the letter to the HOA board, and the support of the code enforcement officer, I felt like I had built a solid legal fortress around my riverfront property. But I knew that Karen wasn't going to give up easily. She was too stubborn, too determined, too Karen. And that's why I was ready to unleash my secret weapon. It was time to show Karen that I wasn't just a homeowner with a deed and a lawyer. I was a former Navy officer with a legally docked warship, and I was about to use it to defend my riverfront paradise. The USS Relentless was about to make its presence known. I realized now that some might question the wisdom of escalating the situation with the USS Relentless. Some might call it overkill, a disproportionate response to a relatively minor property dispute. But I had reached my breaking point. Karen's relentless harassment, Her baseless accusations and her blatant disregard for my property rights had pushed me too far. I needed to send a message. A clear and unmistakable signal that I was not to be messed with. The decision to fire a warning shot was not taken lightly. I consulted with my lawyer, Sarah. To ensure that it was legally permissible, I contacted the local authorities to inform them of my intentions, and I took every precaution to ensure that the shot was fired safely and responsibly. The warning shot was fired from one of the Relentless deck guns, which had been modified to fire blank rounds. The shot was aimed high into the air, well away from any buildings or people. It was a purely symbolic act, designed to send a message of resolve. The sound of the deck gun reverberated through the neighborhood, shaking windows and setting off car alarms. It was a sound that few people in this quiet suburban community had ever heard before. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Karen and her remaining supporters scattered like cockroaches fleeing from the light. The phone lines at the HOA office lit up with calls from panicked residents, and the local news media descended upon my property, eager to capture the story of the homeowner who had fired a warning shot from his warship. I emerged from the Relentless, the entire community, to come aboard and see what all the fuss was about. The tour was a huge success. Hundreds of people showed up, eager to explore the ship and meet the homeowner who had dared to stand up to Karen and the HOA. I led the tours myself, sharing stories about the ship's history and my passion for naval service. I answered their questions patiently and honestly, and I made it clear that I was not trying to intimidate anyone, but simply to defend my property rights. The tour was a public relations disaster for Karen and the HOA. It showed them that I had the support of the community and that their attempts to vilify me had failed miserably. But even after the tour, Karen refused to give up. She continued to harass me, to spread rumors about me, and to file frivolous lawsuits against me. She was like a persistent mosquito, buzzing around my head and refusing to go away. It was clear that I needed to take a more decisive action. I needed to find a way to end this conflict once and for all. And that's when I came up with a plan that was so audacious, so outrageous, and so completely unexpected that it just might work. I decided to run for president of the HOA. I know, it sounds crazy, but I figured that if I couldn't beat them, I would join them. And if I couldn't join them, I would take over their organization and dismantle it from the inside out. I launched my campaign with a series of witty and provocative campaign ads. I promised to bring transparency, accountability, and common sense to the HOA. I vowed to end the frivolous lawsuits and to focus on the issues that really mattered to the community. My campaign was a grassroots effort, fueled by the support of my neighbors and the media attention that I had generated with the USS Relentless. I attended every HOA meeting, answered every question, and shook every hand. I made it clear that I was not just running for president to settle a score with Karen, but to make the HOA a more effective and responsive organization. The election was a nail-biter. Karen ran a vicious campaign against me, accusing me of being a power-hungry tyrant who wanted to destroy the community. But in the end, I prevailed. I won the election by a narrow margin, thanks to the support of a silent majority of residents who were tired of Karen's petty feuds and her heavy-handed tactics. When the votes were tallied and my victory was announced, a cheer erupted from the crowd. People were overjoyed that Karen's reign of terror was finally over. I took the stage and addressed the crowd, promising to be a president for all residents, regardless of their views on the USS Relentless or the Riverfront property dispute. I vowed to bring the community together and to create a more harmonious and prosperous neighborhood. Karen, predictably, stormed out of the meeting, her face contorted with rage, but her reign of terror was over. The community had spoken, and they had chosen a new path. A path towards peace, prosperity, and property rights for all. The battle for my Riverfront paradise was finally coming to an end. With Karen defeated and the HOA under new management, I thought the battle for my Riverfront paradise was finally over, but I was wrong. Karen may have been ousted from power, but she was not one to go quietly into the night. She was like a zombie, refusing to stay dead, constantly rising from the grave to unleash new waves of terror. Even after losing the election, Karen continued to harass me, to spread rumors about me, and to file frivolous lawsuits against me. She was a one-woman wrecking crew, determined to make my life as miserable as possible. One day, I received a notice from the city informing me that I was in violation of several zoning ordinances. According to the notice, the USS Relentless was considered an unauthorized structure and was ordered to be removed from my property within 30 days. I was furious. I knew that Karen was behind this, She had used her connections in the city government to try to get me shut down. I immediately contacted my lawyer, Sarah, and told her about the notice. She assured me that we had a strong legal case and that we would fight the city's order. "This is just another attempt by Karen to harass you," Sarah said. "She's not going to get away with it." We filed a lawsuit against the city, arguing that the USS Relentless was legally docked on my property and that the city's zoning ordinances were being selectively enforced to target me. The legal battle was long and arduous, but in the end, we prevailed. The court ruled that the city's order was unlawful and that the USS Relentless was allowed to remain on my property. It was a major victory, but it was short-lived. Karen, like a hydra, just kept growing new heads every time we chopped one off. She started a petition to have me removed from the HOA board. She organized protests outside my house. She even tried to convince my neighbors to boycott my business. I was starting to feel overwhelmed. It seemed like there was no end to Karen's harassment. I was spending all my time fighting her, and I was starting to lose sight of what was important in my life. One day, I was sitting on the deck of the USS Relentless, watching the sunset over the river, when I had an epiphany. I realized that I was letting Karen control my life. I was allowing her to dictate my actions and to steal my joy. I decided that I wasn't going to let her do that anymore. I was going to take back my life and focus on what really mattered to me. I decided to sell my Riverfront property and move to a place where I could live in peace without being harassed by Karen and her cronies. I put my house on the market, and it sold quickly for a good price. I packed up my belongings, said goodbye to my friends, and set sail on the USS Relentless for a new adventure. As I sailed away from the riverfront, I felt a sense of liberation and relief. I had finally escaped Karen's clutches, and I was free to pursue my dreams. I don't know what happened to Karen after I left. I heard rumors that she eventually moved away, defeated and disgraced, but I didn't care. I was finally free, and that's all that mattered. I spent the next few years traveling the world on the USS Relentless, exploring new cultures, meeting new people, and experiencing new adventures. I wrote a book about my experiences, which became a bestseller. I even started a foundation to help other homeowners fight against HOA tyranny. In the end, Karen's harassment turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It forced me to take a stand, to defend my property rights, and to pursue my dreams. And it led me to a life that was far more fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. Okay. I recognized that the previous narrative arc took a turn away from the warning shot element described in the title and key points. Let's rewind a bit and focus on that aspect, providing a different ending that emphasizes the power of that single, decisive action. We'll assume the story has progressed to the point where the USS Relentless has been revealed, and Karen is still stubbornly refusing to back down, escalating her harassment despite the legal and public relations setbacks. The unveiling of the USS Relentless had been a masterstroke, a brilliant display of resourcefulness and resolve. The media attention was overwhelming, the community was largely supportive, and even Karen seemed momentarily stunned. But Karen, as I had learned, was nothing if not resilient in her particular brand of unreasonable. The lawsuits continued. The violation notices piled up, and the whispers and glares followed me everywhere. It was clear that a stronger message was needed. A message that resonated with the raw power of the Relentless itself. I knew that firing a live round was out of the question. Not only would it be illegal and dangerous, but it would also undermine my carefully cultivated image as a reasonable homeowner defending their rights. But a warning shot, a carefully planned, legally compliant, and undeniably attention-grabbing warning shot. That was a different story. I spent days researching the legal parameters. I consulted with Sarah, my lawyer, who, while initially hesitant, eventually agreed that it was permissible as long as we adhered to strict safety protocols. I contacted the local authorities, informing them of my intentions and assuring them that the shot would be fired safely and responsibly. Officer Miller, surprisingly, was almost amused. "Just make sure you clean up the brass," she quipped. I hired a licensed pyrotechnician to handle the explosives and ensure that the shot was fired safely and accurately. We modified one of the Relentless deck guns to fire a blank round, a loud but harmless projectile that would create a spectacular display without causing any damage. The day of the warning shot was carefully chosen. It was a Saturday afternoon, when most of the community was home. The weather was clear and sunny, perfect for maximum visibility. I gathered a small group of trusted friends and neighbors on the deck of the Relentless to witness the event. I wanted to make it clear that this was not an act of aggression. but a demonstration of resolve. As the pyrotechnician prepared the gun, I addressed the crowd. "I want to make it clear that I am not trying to intimidate anyone," I said, my voice ringing across the water. "But I have been left with no choice. Karen and the HOA have been harassing me for months, and they refuse to listen to reason. This warning shot is a message to them. I will not be bullied. I will not be intimidated. And I will defend my property rights to the fullest extent of the law." With that, I gave the signal. The pyrotechnician fired the gun. The sound was deafening. The blank round exploded in a brilliant flash of light and a deafening roar, sending a shockwave that reverberated through the neighborhood. A plume of smoke billowed from the deck gun, hanging in the air like a defiant banner. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The birds took flight. The dogs took cover. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the blast itself. Then, the car alarms began, a chorus of suburban anxiety. I scanned the shoreline. Karen, who had been observing from her front yard with a mixture of defiance and anticipation, was now nowhere to be seen. Her little group of loyalists had vanished as well, presumably seeking refuge in their pastel-colored bunkers. The warning shot had worked. It wasn't just the noise or the spectacle. It was the message it conveyed. It was a demonstration of my unwavering resolve, my willingness to go to extreme lengths to protect my property rights. It was a clear signal that I was not to be trifled with. The days that followed were surprisingly peaceful. The HOA violation notices stopped arriving. The lawsuits were quietly withdrawn. The whispers and glares ceased. Karen and her cohorts had finally backed down. I never received a formal apology, of course. That would have been too much to expect. But the silence was deafening. It was a clear admission of defeat. I later learned that the warning shot had caused a major rift within the HOA. Some members were outraged by my actions, accusing me of being a dangerous vigilante, but others were secretly relieved. They had been growing weary of Karen's relentless feuds and her increasingly bizarre behavior. They saw the warning shot as a wake-up call, a sign that it was time to move on and focus on more important issues. Karen, I heard, was devastated. She had poured her heart and soul into the HOA, and she had seen herself as a champion of the community. To be defeated by a newcomer with a warship was a humiliation she could barely endure. She retreated into her house, rarely venturing out. She stopped attending HOA meetings. She even stopped watering her lawn, a sure sign of suburban surrender. Eventually, she put her house on the market and moved away, seeking refuge in a retirement community in Florida, where she presumably found new targets for her HOA zealotry. With Karen gone, the HOA underwent a major transformation. The new leadership was more reasonable, more transparent, and more focused on serving the needs of the community. They even repealed some of Karen's more draconian regulations. Much to the relief of the residents. My riverfront property became a haven of peace and tranquility. I spent my days tending to my garden, fishing in the river, and enjoying the company of my friends and neighbors. The USS Relentless became a local landmark, a symbol of freedom, independence, and the right to defend your property. I occasionally gave tours of the ship to school groups and history buffs, sharing stories about its past and my own experiences in the Navy. I even started a small foundation to help other homeowners fight against HOA tyranny. In the end, the battle with Karen turned out to be a valuable lesson. It taught me the importance of standing up for what you believe in, of defending your rights, and of never backing down in the face of injustice. And it taught me that sometimes all it takes is a well-placed warning shot to silence the forces of tyranny. Even with Karen gone and a reformed HOA in place, the echoes of the legal battles lingered. The HOA, under its previous, Karen-led incarnation, had initiated several lawsuits, including the claim of an implied easement over my riverfront property and the attempt to have the USS Relentless declared a nuisance. While Karen's departure and the warning shot had effectively ended the harassment, these legal challenges still needed to be formally resolved. The new HOA board, eager to distance itself from Karen's legacy, initially considered dropping the lawsuits altogether. However, their legal counsel advised them that doing so could be interpreted as an admission of wrongdoing and could potentially open the door to counterclaims from me. They suggested pursuing a formal resolution, a legal closure that would protect the HOA from future liability. The lawsuits remained active, albeit in a much less aggressive form. The HOA's new lawyers, a far more reasonable and professional firm than the one Karen had hired, approached Sarah, my lawyer, with a proposal for a settlement. The settlement offer was simple. The HOA would formally drop all claims against me. and I would agree to release the HOA from any and all liability related to Karen's harassment and the previous legal actions. In addition, we would both agree to pay our own legal fees. Sarah advised me to accept the offer. It's a clean break, she said. It puts an end to all the legal uncertainty, and it allows you to move on with your life without having to worry about future lawsuits. I agreed. I was tired of fighting. I just wanted to put this whole ordeal behind me and enjoy my riverfront property in peace. The settlement agreement was presented to the court, and a hearing was scheduled to approve it. The hearing. The HOA's lawyer explained the terms of the settlement to the judge, emphasizing the HOA's desire to resolve the matter amicably and to move forward in a positive direction. The judge, a stern but fair woman who had clearly followed the case with interest, questioned both lawyers extensively, ensuring that the settlement was in the best interests of all parties involved. She expressed her appreciation for the HOA's new approach and commended me for my willingness to defend my property rights. After a brief deliberation, the judge approved the settlement agreement, formally dismissing all claims against me and releasing the HOA from any further liability. The legal battle was finally over. However, Karen, even in absentia, managed to stir up one last bit of trouble. Shortly after the settlement was approved, she filed a pro-Southeast motion with the court, seeking to intervene in the case and to have the settlement overturned. She claimed that the new HOA board had acted improperly, that the settlement was unfair, and that her rights as a homeowner had been violated. The motion was quickly dismissed by the judge. Karen's claims were baseless and without merit, and she had no legal standing to intervene in the case. The judge even issued a stern warning to Karen, cautioning her against filing any further frivolous motions. With Karen's last-ditch attempt to disrupt the peace thwarted, the legal chapter of my Riverfront saga finally came to a close. The HOA was reformed, the lawsuits were dismissed, and my property rights were firmly established. I was finally free to enjoy my riverfront paradise without fear of harassment or legal challenges. The USS Relentless stood guard, a silent sentinel protecting my hard-won peace. The years that followed were a welcome respite from the turmoil and conflict. The river flowed peacefully, the sun shone brightly, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the hull of the USS Relentless, and the cheerful chirping of birds in the trees. That my riverfront property had finally become the sanctuary I had always dreamed of. The reformed HOA, under its new leadership, proved to be a responsible and effective organization. They focused on maintaining the community's amenities, enforcing reasonable regulations, and fostering a sense of camaraderie among the residents. They even organized regular social events, including potlucks, barbecues, and movie nights, which helped to bring the community closer together. Karen, of course, became a cautionary tale in the neighborhood. Her name was rarely spoken, and when it was usually accompanied by a shake of the head and a sigh of disapproval. She became a symbol of what not to do, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and unreasonable demands. The story of my battle with Karen and the HOA spread far and wide. Thanks to the media attention surrounding the USS Relentless, that I received letters and emails from homeowners all over the country, thanking me for standing up for my rights and inspiring them to do the same. I realized that my experience had touched a nerve, that it had resonated with people who were struggling against similar forms of HOA tyranny. I decided to use my newfound platform to advocate for property rights and responsible HOA management. I wrote articles, gave interviews, and spoke at conferences, sharing my story and offering advice to homeowners who were facing similar challenges. I even started a non-profit organization to provide legal assistance and support to homeowners who were being harassed by their HOAs. The USS Relentless became a symbol of this movement, a floating testament to the power of individual resolve and the importance of defending your property rights. I opened the ship to the public, offering tours and sharing stories about its history and my own experiences. I often reflected on the lessons I had learned from my battle with Karen. I realized that property rights are not just abstract legal concepts, but fundamental human rights that are essential for freedom and prosperity. I also learned that responsible HOA management is crucial for maintaining a harmonious community, but that HOAs must be held accountable to ensure that they do not abuse their power. And most importantly, I learned that it is essential to stand up to unreasonable demands, to challenge injustice, and to never back down in the face of tyranny, because if we don't defend our rights, who will? As I Sat on the deck of the USS Relentless, watching the sun set over the river. I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I had faced a formidable challenge, and I had emerged victorious. I had defended my property rights, reformed my community, and inspired others to do the same. And I had done it all with a little help from a Navy ship and a well-placed warning shot. The end.